I'm Jess Schmida. I'm the general manager of some of our security services here at AWS, including Network Firewall and Firewall Manager. Previously, I led the team that built AWS Verified Access, our first higher-level service that helps you simplify Zero Trust on AWS. Today, I'm joined by Quint Van Diemen from the office of our CISO. Quint's been leading our AWS Zero Trust efforts for a few years now and has had thousands of conversations with customers just like you on what we can do to help you on your Zero Trust journey. So I'm going to let Quint take it away now.
Awesome. Thanks, Jess. Thanks for joining us, everybody. So let's get into things. So now, bar-raising security has been central to AWS since the beginning. It always has been and continues to be our top priority. And you see the intention of this security resulting in security architectures that we think are absolutely bar-raising in terms of what you can build on AWS. I'm talking about features that maybe you haven't thought about for a while because it's just sort of the way the cloud has always worked, but software-defined microperimeters, request-level authentication and authorization, accurate maintenance-free state inventory or state and inventory data, right? Machine identities with cryptographically verifiable hardware root of trust, credential distribution at hyperscale, and so on, right? All of these types of concepts would be very, very familiar in any conversation in and around Zero Trust, and that's what we're going to talk about today. All right, so I'm going to start by doing a little grounding with us today. We'll talk a little bit about motivations. We'll talk a little bit about what AWS thinks Zero Trust is in terms of the necessary definitions and maybe some guiding principles and tenets. Then we're going to turn it over to Jess, and as she mentioned a little bit, she's going to talk to you about what's new for us in this space, right? We've had some really important innovations on your behalf, particularly throughout this spring and leading up to here at Reinforce that she's going to walk through. And then I'll take back over at the end, and we're going to do a little bit of envisioning. I want to give you a little bit of a feel of where we're going in this space. It's not the reality of the world today, but I think it's important for you to understand how we see this world continuing to evolve and what we're going to continue to bring for you. Now, as Jess mentioned, over the last handful of years, I've had the chance to talk with countless numbers of great customers such as yourselves, right? And when we sit down, we really work hard to meet you all where you are. That means listening to your specific outcomes that you're after in terms of the business side of Zero Trust. It means understanding and detailing the technical challenges that you're after, right? It means understanding the existing security architectures that you have, the existing investments that you've made, and how we might go about layering Zero Trust on top of that, right? But the key in the end of that is that getting to Zero Trust sort of depends on where you're starting, where you're at. Right? Now, for some customers, the move towards Zero Trust has been just self-motivated. It's sort of a natural, logical iteration of the continued evolution of cybersecurity in general and defense in depth in particular. For other customers, the motivation has been driven by public policy and regulation from all corners of the world. But in general, the security risks we face are pressing, right? And they're guiding you all to be more precise about the controls that you use to control access and audit the same, right? We're always after this raising of the security bar. So despite the hype, despite the fact that it in some ways became whitewashed across everything across the industry, we really believe in this term Zero Trust, right? We believe deeply in the outcomes and the benefits that it provides. And we've done so in our own organization across Amazon, across AWS for many, many years, where we've been putting those concepts to work, right? So this really is, we do fundamentally believe that Zero Trust, despite some of the hype, does lead to better security outcomes and success. So now through those conversations, there are a bunch of points of commonality that always continue to come back, right? Customers had questions like, where do I start? What does good look like? How do I explain Zero Trust to my organization? How do I leverage the investments that I've made, right? We're not starting from scratch here. But ultimately, all of that tends to end up circling around and coming back to a very practical question like this one, right? Which is sort of the age-old question of security in the cloud. I think this is a great question to form as the backdrop for Zero Trust because it just allows us to be practical, better every day. And if we're going to, and Zero Trust is increasingly the term that we might use to describe what good looks like here, but if we anchor on this question, it really helps us move forward effectively. Okay, so invariably, the world needs definitions to get going on Zero Trust. And this is the one that we've offered for many years now. That Zero Trust is a conceptual model and an associated set of mechanisms that focus on providing security controls around digital assets that do not solely or fundamentally depend on traditional network perimeters. Now, instead, we're going to rely on identity, device, other advanced signals to bring in and make ever more continuous, adaptive, and sophisticated access control decisions, right? The other thing I want to bring your attention to is that we're very deliberate that this is a security model, right? Zero Trust is not something you're going to buy. You may buy products. You might buy products from AWS. You might buy products from our great partner organizations. You might build products or services that help you get to Zero Trust. But you need to start by considering it as a security model. It's not a simple checkbox thing that you're going to buy off the shelf. Okay, so now definitions are necessary, but at Amazon, we really find that guiding principles, or tenets as we might call them, really help sharpen our thinking in this space. And we've been offering a number of guiding principles to our customers for a while that we'll walk through here today. The first is simply to avoid a binary choice. It's pretty easy to get going in any Zero Trust conversation, and someone will invariably throw out something to the effect of, the network perimeter is dead, long live the identity-centric perimeter, or perhaps vice versa, depending on their particular persuasion. But we really think that that's a false choice, right? While network perimeters, like what we sort of just walked through, we no longer want to think of as sufficient, they're very useful. They're very well understood. They're very easy to reason about. They've been around a long time. There's a lot of strong skill set and expertise within many of your organizations, most of your organizations, around how to do network security. Now, inside of that, often identity-centric controls can provide greater levels of granularity. You've been using identity-centric controls to talk to the cloud, for years, or literally since the dawn of the cloud, right? But ideally, those two things shouldn't be an and, they should be an or, right? They ought to work together in good harmony. And ideally, not only should they coexist, but they should be aware of one another, right? Now, the original example, or at least the most easy to get a hold of example, was something like a VPC endpoint. So this was a control at the edge of your network that understood the identities, resources, and network locations involved that were flowing across it. And you could write a policy that understood all of those dimensions and really delivered excellent access control. So we're going to see today how this theme of this convergence has continued to evolve in some of the new services. But this is a really important point that you don't need to throw out what's been working in order to get to what's next. Now, the second guiding principle that we've been offering to you for a while is this notion of working backwards from your use cases. When we originally started talking with customers a good handful of years ago, we largely saw synergy around these three, right? About how you get humans to applications, the proverbial any user from any coffee shop anywhere in the world, no VPN required. How we might think about moving Zero Trust into the data center, service to service, machine to machine, a lot of names there. And then sort of a broad bucket for stuff that existed wholly outside the corporate network entirely, right? The IoT-enabled wind turbine or oil tank sitting well outside the corporate network, beaming critical telemetry to the cloud. And what's interesting about those use cases is that they share these very familiar underlying technical principles. We want to get away from the network. We want to bring identity and other contexts to bear. But at the same time, they're very different in the objectives they're after, or the outcomes that they're after, right? The first might be about mobility. It might be about workforce happiness. It might be about work from home in the middle of a pandemic. The second is typically about reducing unnecessary pathways through our organization, particularly those that lead to data, right? But if we focus on use cases, again, we get very practical. We get really focused on the problems that we're trying to solve, and we avoid getting mired in this what is or what is not zero trust that can often bleed too much into these conversations, right? And so I really strongly encourage you to think about zero trust is the how. Zero trust isn't the what. You aren't implementing zero trust for zero trust's sake. You're implementing zero trust for a business outcome or a technical outcome that are generally going to align to these use cases. Now, in the time since then, again, there was as folks got a little bit further down the path of understanding and implementing zero trust, other use cases have clearly come to light that are generally now sort of bucketed under the banner of zero trust. There's likely many more, but maybe a few others that I'll sort of explicitly call out. The operator to workload, right? Distinct from a business user accessing an application through a web browser, maybe think about this as how an operator might go in through SSH to get to an operating system or a database engine, right? Human to data. Whether that's in the realm of data science or otherwise, right? Where we've got folks that need, by the function of what they're trying to do, very close and intimate access to data. But we also, obviously, that data has a lot of sensitivity to it, right? And how can we bring zero trust principles to make sure that very intimate access is carefully controlled? And then, perhaps it's one of the, a bit further down the maturity curve, but how can we even think about taking zero trust to its ultimate state where the things that we're considering in terms of access decisions are way down within the applications, even more granular than something you might get from a cloud API call, right? And so all of this brings me, and finally, our last principle, right? That zero trust is still in a relatively nascent state. It still is not something that we think one size fits all. Now that's relatively decent guidance for just about anything in the cloud, right? If you try to wedge everything into one, friction is going to ensue for your workforce and otherwise, right? So don't use this where it really matters. Start start by using zero trust to protect the things that really matter the most to you, and use that as a way to credibly build experience, muscle memory, and authenticity in the way you might roll it out more broadly. At the same time, we really think of this as a way to give you, to let you, retire some of the controls that you've had for a while, but they're probably brittle and they're probably not really adding much value. Right? Maybe we think of the VPN and some of those things in that light. So not only is it guidance to help you understand where you should use zero trust and extend your security model, but also think of this principle as a way to let's use it to simplify things and get things out that are no longer really doing their job. Okay. So now we regularly get feedback that indicates that these principles are really helping folks stay grounded and focused on improving their security each and every day in very practical and real ways, right? And I hope that they'll help you in a similar fashion. But customers don't just share what's worked, of course, right? They share as you continue to share, as you should for sure, continue to share your fair share of suggestions and capabilities that we could improve upon, right? That we could provide, where we could provide more assistance. So there's lots of permutations of use cases out there, but again, those first two that I mentioned around humans to applications and controlling flow of data are very common and are often expressed back to back. And you all have really told us that you want to be able to integrate and fuse your technology investments in a way that you just gets to those better outcomes rather than those siloed piece parts. So Jess is going to talk to you a bit more about the services that we're building that bring you these capabilities with much less assembly required, much more AWS opinionated guidance built in. Right? Now, before I turn it over to her here, for context, what you all were experiencing, right, as we gave you at first those lower level primitives, is a long-held Amazon belief. In short, primitives, not frameworks. Our Amazon CTO, Werner Vogels, wrote and spoke about this extensively when he reflected on the first 10 years of AWS. But in short, it's our very deliberate way of building software and systems from the bottom up. There's a lot to unpack here, and if you're interested, I'd encourage you to read his blog about how successful complex systems must evolve out of collections of simple systems. But for Zero Trust specifically, this really guides us in decomposing big and ambiguous problems, where the clarity of the end state isn't nearly as good as the clarity of where we might begin. And this allows us to make progress while continuing to gain insights. What's working, what's not, and ensuring that we're being very deliberate and working backwards from your pain points, not our preconceived notions. So I'd like to bring in Jess to share with you how those very insights have led to the next generation of higher level Zero Trust focused services. Jess, take it away.
Thanks, Quint. So let's learn a little bit more about how AWS is helping you simplify Zero Trust in your organizations. So something we've observed is that when we give you those sort of flexible primitives and tools that we had Werner talk about there for a second in text, you do something that's really amazing. Not only do you use them to solve the problems that we expect you to solve, but you also solve problems that we had no idea you were going to solve. You find interesting opportunities to apply these technologies to problems that crop up in your world, and that's really exciting. Because then my job is to come and talk to you, learn about the problems you're solving, and find better ways to solve those problems. And through that sort of iterative cycle, we build even better systems for each other and make the world go better. So in the world of Zero Trust, this means that we're focusing on simple foundational services that you can use to solve those use cases that Quint talked about directly. And then over time, we'll find better ways to make it even simpler for you. So I want to talk by diving deeper into that first use case, which is the human-to-app use case. This is somebody sitting in a coffee shop, maybe working from home, accessing a secure corporate application. Now, this is a dynamic security environment. There's a lot of things going on in this space. And it's not the same kind of thing that we've been used to, where you have a worker on a corporate network that you can trust. So how do you establish trust in this situation between somebody who may have left her laptop open or may have needed to get patches installed on a machine and get sensitive data access? It's a tricky thing. Now, a lot of you have been solving this with a variety of techniques. And the first one is obviously VPN. In my last role before I came over to Network Firewall, I was the GM of VPN. And so I understand VPN. VPN's fantastic. Don't get me wrong. I'd love to sell you more VPN. The challenge with VPN is, you log in at the front door, you get access to the corporate network, maybe you re-authenticate from time to time, but you still have to dial into the network, and then you get other challenges of getting your data transferred. Maybe somebody's trying to go to YouTube. It gets a little complicated in some other ways. On the other hand, some of you have been securing your web applications by putting them directly on the internet and layering various security services like Shield or WAF and helping you establish trust from that untrusted endpoint into your application. But again, usually these rely on authenticating once at the front door, and you can control session length, but that can get pretty annoying. So we knew this could be simpler, and I think a lot of you have seen a lot of ways that this could be simpler. And that's why we introduced AWS Verified Access, which is now GA at the end of April. AWS Access helps you simplify access to corporate applications using Zero Trust principles. Instead of having to check just once at login, Verified Access checks every request in real time based on the latest security data using policies that you define. Your end users get seamless experience accessing their corporate applications. And instead of having to assemble multiple services, you just put Verified Access in front of your application. You can write a unique policy per app and control access that way. Diving in a little deeper, delivering Zero Trust, AWS Verified Access, or AVA as I like to call it, AWS Verified Access, AVA. AVA brokers security signals from some of our partners like Okta or Ping Identity on the identity side, or CrowdStrike and Jamf on the device side. It brings these security signals together and enables you to write policy using Cedar to guarantee the right kind of access that you're looking for. You write an application policy per application. You can group them together to simplify. You can even write policy that includes network path. Back to Quint's, not an or, an and. It's an easier thing it's definitely an easy thing for you to say, well, I only want to have access from these geographies. You can definitely put that right into the access policy. Verified Access also logs all of these security data, the access requests, into central logs, which simplifies your security and audit team's ability to see what's going on and make sure that the right things are happening. You can send these logs to your SIEM partners that you're already using, like Datadog, Rapid7, IBM, Sumo Logic. Makes it easier. We're getting great feedback already on Ava. In fact, here we've got a quote from Deloitte. Deloitte's using Ava as part of their zero trust architecture for their client applications. It helps them deliver security by reducing their configuration overhead, gives them a central unified ingress point, helps them manage access policies instead of infrastructure, and helps them standardize and secure their private applications while expediting new development. We're really proud of what the feedback we're getting so far, and we're looking forward to more. Now, the next use case I want to talk about is that machine-to-machine use case. This is sort of an east-west thing. So Ava helps secure the front door to your application. But once you're inside the castle, as we like to say, there's often multiple services that have to work together in order to deliver the value of your application. This can be just a web server and a database server, or more likely these days, it's a collection of microservices that are working together to deliver value. I talked to one CISO. He said, I have all these microservices running on my network, and it's hard for me to know who's talking to what, or even if they should be. It's a really tricky problem for a lot of our customers. We want to help you eliminate unnecessary network paths through this. That's the goal. So our customers are solving this problem in a few ways today. One customer I know is using lots of microsegmented security groups. This works really well, but this is on the order of thousands of security groups with security group referencing and fine detail permissions. It's amazing, but it's difficult to manage. Some other customers are working on more of like a service mesh kind of architecture. So maybe you'll put a private link at the front door into your service mesh, and then you're running all these sidecars in your containers. You're managing all those sidecars. You're patching all those sidecars. You're configuring all those sidecars. It's a lot. It adds up. Maybe some of you are all in on serverless, and you've got Lambdas, and you've got an API gateway in front, and you're using IAM access policies, and that's giving you a lot of security, but maybe you're not all the way in on serverless. There's a lot of things that have to work together here. So the net is that we recognize this is complex. And we knew when we stepped back to think about how to simplify this, we had this insight. You don't actually want to think about networking. You want to think about designing your application. You want to create systems that work together, that communicate together in the right way, but you don't want to have to think about IPs and ports. That's just extra overhead. So we stepped way back. We thought big, and we realized that, we're AWS. We're giving you all this compute substrate. Why are we making you think about networking all the time? Didn't make sense. So that's why we built Amazon VPC Lattice. VPC Lattice, which is now GA at the end of March, is a complete reimagination of how services communicate, discover, and connect to each other. It connects your services at scale across a variety of different compute substrates, including EC2, ECS, EKS, Lambda. It all works together. You define specific access policies on which services can talk to which, and you can even put in advanced network controls, like how to do load distribution, to make these things work well together. Lambda streamlines this service-to-service interaction, making you not have to think about the networking anymore. Now let's look at how you use Lattice in a zero trust use case. So instead of implementing all this complexity yourself, you can focus right in on your application, and then Lattice comes in and takes over the connectivity. With Lattice, your services aren't exposed to a network. So what's actually happening is that when these services communicate, they're communicating in this link local address space. This is the 169.254 address space. You're already using this to talk to our instance metadata service, for example. This is our special porthole to inject AWS capability into your services. And what this means is that you can actually shut down all open ports on these microservices. If you go and you try to nmap one of these things, it just doesn't even show up. It's a really amazing property. So there's no ports open. Additionally, Lattice handles the connectivity for you. So you don't have to set up network paths between your services. These can be running across different VPCs or in different subnets. Lattice just handles figuring out how to make the connectivity work. On top of that, every request is authenticated in real time by IAM. You get short-lived credentials between these microservices and those requests are constantly checked. And I think as you heard yesterday, IAM is handling 1 billion requests every second, and so it's definitely able to handle the scale. In net, Lattice helps you weld that computer shut, which is a really fantastic security property. So the next thing I want to talk about is that there's a consistent through line throughout all these zero trust conversations. So we've talked about north-south into the front door. We've talked about east-west between microservices. But there's another dimension. And that is every time you set a zero trust policy, you write policy. Zero trust is about defining very tightly what it is you do trust. And that means writing a lot of policies. And that means a lot of writing if it isn't done right. So the idea here is that we knew you needed to be able to define policies. Now, we have a lot of experience doing that with IAM. Obviously, like I just mentioned, we're running IAM at incredible scale. We've got tons of years of experience working on that. It works really well. The problem, though, with zero trust is that the policies that you need to write in this world are about your business, your domain, your users. IAM is great, but it only talks about AWS's domain of space of things. So we knew we needed something a little bit different. It needed to represent your world. Now, given that we can't use IAM for this, next, what is it that we need to think about when we create a policy system? Now, based on our experience, we know that you need to have something that you can write the right policies that you need. It needs to be expressive. It needs to be you need to be able to clearly write down what you trust. It also needs to be fast. It needs to be really performant. I think that one's obvious. Third, it needs to be provable. Now, this one's less obvious, but it's super important in a security space. Now, we've made a differentiated investment here at AWS in automated reasoning. We have an incredible group of people with formal reasoning background who come in and help us formally prove a lot of our systems. And through that experience, we recognized that this provability tenet was incredibly important in policy design. And so, I think you've seen this by using IAM Access Analyzer. That product has made a huge difference in your quality of life, I think. So these are the three sort of core principles around the right kind of policy system. It has to be expressive, performant, and provable. So again, looking at the options that we had, I am only about AWS products here. We looked at open source products like Open Policy Agent or Rego. We looked at some other products out there. And some of those hit the expressive part. A lot of them hit the performant part. Very few of them hit provable. And those that did hit provable didn't hit expressive. So we realized we needed something new in the world. And we recognized that was a big deal. Introducing a new policy language is a new thing for us to learn, and that's a challenge. But we were convinced that we needed to do this. And that's why we introduced Cedar. Cedar's designed to hit those three capabilities in a way that no other policy system can. And we've seen that to be true so far. Cedar, by the way, is now open source, so you can see how we built it. You can use it in your applications. I'm really excited about it. At the same time, we saw another thing happening in the world. And that is, a lot of you are building authentication systems into your own applications. I did this myself. Before coming to Amazon, I was CTO of a company that I co-founded, and we built this incredibly powerful and complicated authentication system into our application. It was Ruby on Rails, which I liked, but we had mixed opinions over the years. It was great. It was custom. It was tailored to our needs. It worked really well, but it was really hard to change, and it was really hard to get right. And that's what I've heard a lot of you say. It's hard to get these things right. It's hard to change them. And with this advent of zero trust, we've been focusing so much more on bringing multiple security signals into the table. Like now that you need to think about device trust and other things, you often have to go and edit those authentication systems and authorization systems, and that's a lot of extra work. And as we see more and more change and more growth in this space, we know there's just going to be more and more undifferentiated heavy lifting. And that's the thing. You're not able to focus on your business domain when you're dealing with authorization. So again, we knew we had an incredible set of experience with IAM. And then with this revelation of knowing that we need to use Cedar to help write better policies, we recognized that we could help you in another way. And that's why we launched Amazon Verified Permissions, which now became GA yesterday. Verified Permissions is a scalable permissions management system that gives you fine-grained authorization into your applications. You can embed it deeply into your systems, helps you accelerate application development by not having to worry about that kind of authorization system. You can just plug it right in. It gives you that authenticated, the proven power of CEDR to help you protect your data and resources. And it simplifies compliance audits by logging all of these access requests centrally. So you can categorically define who has access to what. Let's look at AVP, I like to shorten things, Amazon Verified Permissions in a zero trust space. So to get started using AVP, you start by defining your business domain. You create an entity mapping of your business objects and the actions you can take upon them. Often you can figure out a way to export this from your system, but AVP has to understand your domain because, again, you're going to write policies about your domain. You then integrate AVP's SDK into your application, and every time you want to make an access decision, you call the library, you call the API. You pass in a context, and AVP responds with permit or a forbid. Now, that context can be something from your own application, like your user identity and what they're trying to access. But you can also, if you've put Ava at the front door, Ava gives you a JSON object out the back for every request that you can actually just consume, either pass it on directly to AVP or combine it with your own application's context to get that entire set of end-to-end zero trust. So you can get the authentication information, you can get device trust information from Ava, you can layer in maybe the business model that you're trying to access and some of the domain information, and you get a really powerful set of permissions capabilities. Later, you can audit all those permissions at scale using verified permissions. I think it's a really exciting end-to-end story that we're able to bring to the table now, and I hope you find that to be true as well. All right, so I'm done talking about what we have on the truck today. I'm going to bring Quint back on stage so we can talk about where we're going to go in the future.
Awesome. Thanks, Jess. Awesome. So a final thought that we want to share with you all today is a little bit of our vision for where we see Zero Trust going, even beyond the evolutions that Jess has shared with you today. Right? If I had one phrase for it, it'd be ubiquitous authorization. We continue to see these worlds of identity and networking continue to converge and collide, right? We saw that originally with that first guiding principle that I offered for you about avoiding that binary choice, right? About how these things work better together. Continuing from that original example of the VPC endpoint, we've seen that principle continue to strengthen and resolve as we've brought you Amazon Verified Access, or VPC Lattice, and more, right? Now, another way that we might think about that, our identity and the associated set of signals like device and behavior are some of the most important signals into Zero Trust, while network enforcement points continue to be some of the most important places to enforce Zero Trust, right? And if we're able to think about these things in this converged way, we might be able to get to a point where we're able to do what we've never been able to achieve before. Authorization that happens from the outermost perimeter to the deepest rings within the core, with such sophistication, adaptability, continuousness, and more that would have just been unimaginable, or at least unattainable, just years ago. Now, we think this represents some pretty stark ways in which our view of Zero Trust differs from other folks in the industry. I will absolutely agree that making perimeter controls more intelligent and sophisticated is absolutely great incremental progress. But to really get to the value, to really get to the promise of Zero Trust, we need to be thinking about evaluating these access decisions, these authorization decisions, across the entire lifespan of a request as it moves from the outermost to the innermost portions of our organization. Right? Now, why might we think about that? Authentication and identity has been centralized for years, right? But authorization has really been spread to the wind. It's buried, and there's maybe some group information, and so we might make some coarse-grained decisions in that identity provider. But beyond that, it's buried in file ACLs, it's buried in table grants, it's buried in all sorts of downstream systems throughout your enterprise that are literally impossible to reason about in a collective way, much less gain control over or audit, right? And so, this is, in essence, what we think is the fundamental problem to solve. And with your help, we intend to solve it ubiquitously. Now, in this sense, ubiquity also implies consistency. We need a couple of things to make this work, right? And the first thing that we need consistently across this environment is shared auth context, right? The identities and contexts that are operating or that are associated with a request as it flows through these various enforcement points must propagate along with the request, even when the request is comprised of multiple related flows. Think of a simple example of this as a human clicks a button in an application and that results in some microservices calls that might end up in a Lambda function with its own identity that's now operating on behalf of that human as it goes and retrieves some data. Now, within AWS technology today, this notion of identity propagation is already there. You might not have seen it, but if you go and use a service like Amazon Athena that you might use to query into S3, Athena understands its role, its permissions as an AWS service, but it also understands you, the user, and your permissions that it's operating on behalf of. Now, within our ecosystem today, there's still a bit of a pivot point, right? In the example that I described, like you can see and reason about both the human identity and Lambda's identity as it operates on behalf of the human, but there is that pivot point. We aren't fully converged yet, right? But we see a pathway to getting that done, and work is already well underway. Now, the second thing that we need to have consistent across this environment is a consistent authorization evaluation, right? And Jess just walked you through the CEDAR policy language and its corresponding evaluation engine, right? Which we really see as our pathway to giving you this consistency. We see a hierarchy of policies that logically inherit and stack together to represent the types of authorization decisions that you want in increasingly granular ways as you move through the environment. We also see this as one place to integrate all your signal and context providers, right? Jess talked about identity providers, device providers. There's lots of things that need to feed into these decisions, and we don't want to be doing those integrations at each and every point of this stack, right? We want to do it once. And certainly, we think that this is the right layer to do it in, right? Now, again, today, we see half this world operates in CEDAR. You heard Jess talk about the use of CEDAR and verified access, verified permissions, right? But a lot of the traditional world of AWS operates in the language of identity and access management, right? IAM, right? As an interesting piece of Amazon history, or not history, but a flavor of color, our existing language internally is known as Balsa. So I don't know all the history on it, but apparently we've got some hobbyist woodworkers afoot somewhere in the bowels of AWS, right? Okay, and then now the last point of consistency that we need are this notion of this combined place to bring together all this logs, all this telemetry. A big part of what Zero Trust is, it's about making all these siloed piece parts work better together, right? We want to be able to let those security tools do their job, but emit telemetry that goes into a place that we can reason about collectively and ideally bring that flywheel back around and help inform all those various enforcement points. Right? So now, finally, we're going to wrap all of that in AWS opinionated guidance, right? Back to some of those questions I shared at the onset. Where do I start? How do I get going? What should I do next? Where's my risk? Where can I make a meaningful impact, right? And we'll lead you along the way, along those journeys, right? So, listen, there's a lot to digest here, right? We look forward to your continued feedback as we go about building this vision, but we think we're meaningfully on our way towards making it real, right? We talked today about how verified access might be that enforcement point for applications, verified permissions for AppLogic. You've got things that we didn't even talk about today, Session Manager and others for infrastructure, Lattice for microservices. And we're going to continue to converge these worlds of networking and identity that are going to fill in even further vertical slivers of this diagram and many more, right? So we think we're on our way to making it a real we really think we're on our way to making this vision a reality for you, right? And we'd like to offer that we think we're ready and in a position to have authorization join this club of ubiquity alongside encryption, right? We long ago recognized that this consistent authorization vision was necessary, right? When we built AWS, all these services that have this one common authorization language, right? And think now, as we apply Zero Trust, AWS applying that same rigor, that same philosophy of ubiquitous authorization, as Jess explained, even into your domain beyond our domain. So we aren't there yet, but we really think that when we get there, we're going to have something that really delights you. Now, to sort of close it out, we have an Amazon expression that it's always day one, right? And that's just really our way of making sure we stay in the mentality that we're building and innovating on your behalf each and every day. So we're definitely well underway on this journey, right? You can go back to the earliest days of AWS and how folks are using our API calls over the world's most untrustworthy network in the world, the internet, to call and query their most sensitive data. We've been at this for a long time, and we think we've made some meaningful progress in what we've shared with you here today about how bringing together things in a more packaged and more refined way, right? But we think that where we're going again is unique, right? And we really look forward to you all to going along on this journey along with us, right? And so with that, I really appreciate your time today. I look forward to your feedback. Please do fill out your surveys. We really take that meaningfully. And if any of you all have questions or would like to talk about Zero Trust in greater depth, Jess and I are going to hang out in the hallway after a quick second, to take any questions that you might have. So thanks, and enjoy the rest of your time here at Reinforce.